Alright, so here's the deal. Dreamside Interactive reached out to sponsor this video. They literally just dropped a new open world survival RPG with Frozen Flame, this coming out a couple of days ago. And let me tell you, I cannot stop thinking about this game. Obviously playing it too, but this is one of those games where you're like making lunch and I'm over here strategizing what my next steps are to gather resources and attempt to beat the boss that I've lost to several times in a row now. And it feels like it's just one of those games that is incredibly high on the fun factor. So what actually is Frozen Flame? Like I mentioned before, it's going to be an open world RPG, this featuring a bunch of survival elements, but not the punishing ones. It also takes place in this super pretty world. There's a bunch of lore, but just the visuals of this world I think are kind of like one of those timeless designs where it really drew me in. There's going to be a bunch of lore you could find, and basically what's going on here is there was a bunch of dragons that used to rule over the land of Arcana, that's where this takes place, but they pretty much all died out. So now there's all kinds of crazy new creatures and monsters roaming around, but also just some regular things like boars, fish, and even humans. And one of the things I particularly like about this game is, like many other open world survival RPGs, you're just thrown into it. There's not an extended intro for this one. You have something very short, an intro tutorial, but after that you're in. You can go off to build a beautiful dream home, take off some of the toughest enemies that you definitely shouldn't be fighting this early, or just do some quests for some of the NPCs you'll stumble upon and find scattered all throughout the world. It's going to be a very true open world experience, but at the same time, it's not going to be over the top ridiculous, which seems to be an aspect some games in this genre pride themselves on. Frozen Flame is not a game where you're going to just drop dead of dehydration if you don't beeline it for water immediately. You're able to run around, collect some items, and really just get a feel for your environment overall. Decide, hey, I want to build a house here. It looks kind of pretty. Survival elements are a thing, but not to some ridiculous or harsh degree. As a general rule of thumb, there will be some enemies guarding bases around the map, as well as at nighttime, things can get pretty scary as many of the enemies or neutral NPCs will become a lot more aggroed, so you'll probably want somewhere to hide or a base to stay in at nighttime. At the same time though, you could pretty much just run away from most of the enemies if you don't want to deal with them, but otherwise this is largely a game where you don't really have to stress about hunger, thirst, or sleeping. Instead, in Frozen Flame, the way it'll work is you can create something like a bed in your base and sleep in it, but this will give your character a buff rather than being a hard requirement for survival. And this is going to apply to a bunch of stuff like staying warm, building a shelter, and more. And I really like this. It allows you to ease into some of the mechanics, discover the game as you want to. But speaking of mechanics, food is a pretty cool one. You're going to do the typical survival game stuff here, like collecting a bunch of resources, mining stone, chopping down trees, collecting food, and in turn you're going to build up a base, build up some storage, and crafting things. But along the way, you're going to end up picking up a bunch of different food items, which you can eat these on your own if you want to for some reason, but the real way to do it is to cook them. And when cooking at a campfire, what you'll discover is a bunch of the foods have different benefits to them. Like apples will be particularly good at health regeneration over time, where meat will largely just give you a health boost as you're eating it. And even things like mushrooms do boost up your stamina. So over time, you'll start to learn your ideal combination, or even which food items you want to eat when. Like here, I am specifically chowing down on some food that will not only heal me, but increase my movement speed. So I'm able to continue kiting this boss and actually survive here. I think this is one of the pretty fun parts about this game and really can be extrapolated to the game overall. There's a lot about exploration and discovery. This game is very new. It only came out a couple of days ago, like I mentioned, so there's not going to be some pre-established meta or a ton of guides online as to what the best way to do things are, because there's many other users out there right now trying to discover that for themselves. So you kind of jump into this world and experiment, and you try and figure out what works for you, or even what situationally will be the best outcome. Frozen Flame will have a bunch of full-fledged RPG mechanics. There's going to be a ton of abilities you can spec into. You'll get experience from doing all kinds of things, of course quests, but also combat, and even these little stone puzzles that are all throughout. And although there are abilities for things like flying mounts or even increasing your carry weight, there's also a ton of combat-related abilities, like this healing circle I unlocked, but also to allow you to spec into a certain weapon if you want to. By default, there's going to be a few different options, like being able to use this magic staff, archery, or even just typical melee combat, but as you unlock new things, you'll get even more powerful options with these. Although right off the bat, you can kind of go whichever direction you want. All of these options are very viable. So you explore around, gain experience, and are able to upgrade and enhance your character, but also exploration will really benefit you in crafting, which I feel like is somewhat unique for survival games. Frozen Flame has a pretty cool mechanic where you have a bunch of crafting options right off the bat, but there's a bunch of other things that you're going to want to unlock, like better items. And the way you unlock these is either by finding them in chests around boss fights, or even buying recipes from vendors. trading is a thing here. Actually, several quest givers also double as traders, and it creates this pretty cool gameplay loop where you might be like, oh, this guy's selling a bunch of stuff that I'm having trouble getting. So okay, here, let me go collect a bunch of fish, cook them, and I'll return to him and create this little trade route almost where now I have a bunch of cloth so I could create a full cloth armor set, and then I could go out and actually more comfortably deal with this boss fight. It has a very natural and organic gameplay loop where you slowly build up your character over time, with a lot of it being based around this exploration. And there's going to be a ton of quests you'll find along the way. Some of these are going to involve raiding dungeons and taking on some unique threats down there. Others are pretty simple, just collecting something. But the game does a good job of establishing a few larger goals that are really progression milestones that you'll kind of have there in the background and work towards over time. But at the same time, you could just not do that. You could build up a massive house if you'd rather go that route. But upgrading yourself and your character is definitely important because you're going to notice some of these boss fights can get pretty difficult. And there's going to be a few times where you take on a boss and you're like, okay, I am completely outmatched here. One thing that is nice is the game in no way restricts this from you. Like, some of you watching are probably better than me at this game and could beat this boss, even though I failed numerous times. But at the same time, I feel like it's actually pretty unique in this genre of games for it to encourage this, because there's not a lot of punishing features in Frozen Flame. There are survival mechanics, and when you die, you do lose some of your essence, but you don't actually lose your items. You can go back and collect those items again. There's going to be fast traveling in this game, so it doesn't turn into a running simulator, as well as overall the mechanics in general aren't nearly as punishing as they could be, which I actually really liked. You're able to freely experiment with your abilities in the early game, always knowing that, yeah, if I want to go a different route, I could just reset my abilities and spec them differently. Or if you really want to devote them into one thing like archery or melee. All of this is super fun in its own right. It has a lot of the elements of hardcore games without actually being overly hardcore itself. Sometimes the battle against the game becomes too tedious or too frustrating, and Frozen Flame doesn't have that problem. And it gets a ton better because this game also features full-fledged multiplayer and co-op. So you don't actually have to go into this world alone. You can invite some of your friends or even jump onto some of the already available servers out there and play with other people. Whether this be building up a base together or just adventuring or even letting other people carry you through different dungeons or against other enemies. And with this game being a real true sandbox experience, it feels like it is a perfect experience to share with others. And there are a ton of other people out there. And I feel like right now is actually a really good time to get into that because it's such a new game. It has this really nice sense of community with a bunch of people figuring things out together. Sometimes literally, like in the game, people are experimenting and testing things out together, but also in the broader sense. You can jump on the Discord, find community members answering questions and asking their own questions. And whether you're playing alone or even with some of your friends, it does feel like a great time to jump in. The devs have already published a roadmap of some of the future updates that are coming to the game, so you know things are going to remain relatively active over the next couple of months. But also I feel like this is a nice game to experience with this growing community. It has a nice degree of challenge, but not to a ridiculous degree. I mean, it has blocking, which I feel like even just that being a feature is kind of nice. You don't only have to rely on dodging. You could actually block incoming melee attacks. With that said, if you guys do enjoy this, if you think this game looks interesting, you can check out Frozen Flame for yourself. I definitely will be playing it this weekend quite a bit. With that said though, as always again, I thank you for watching. I hope you guys found this video informative, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.